Hello. So, I wanted to make a video on the 2015 UK general election, which is tomorrow, but I have been quite busy recently, hence the lack of Supernatural Scientology episodes. So, I don't have the time to make a video. So, I'm going to do the next best thing and just talk for a few minutes about the general election because it's a topic that interests me. And I might be quite interesting for people that aren't living in the UK to learn just a small amount of UK politics. I'm by no means an expert on this sort of stuff, so I can't guarantee that everything I say will be 100% accurate. But still, this is my view on the way things are going to work. So the UK has a first past the post system, which means that there are 650 constituencies that you can vote in certain candidates. So the candidate with the most votes in each constituency becomes an MP, and they become one of 650 representatives in the UK House of Commons, which is the principal lawmaking authority in the UK. There are also things like the House of Lords, but they don't really have as much power as the House of Commons. The House of Commons is responsible for making most of the laws. So in the likely event that one party holds the most MPs, so more than 50%, a majority, they would form a government and they would be in power. So typically, there are two governments in the UK which tend to be in power, the Conservative government and the Labour government. And since the Second World War, these two parties have basically switched hands. Now and again. So sometimes it would be the Conservative-led government and sometimes it would be a Labour-led government. So Winston Churchill was a Conservative Prime Minister, for example, and so was Margaret Thatcher, while Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were Labour Prime Ministers. So generally the UK has got basically a two-party system, although I wouldn't say as much so as the US. And in the case of the Prime Minister doesn't have as much power as the President of the US will have. Anyway, this particular election is quite interesting because the usual state of affairs, where you end up with either a Labour-controlled government or a Conservative-controlled government, is not going to be the case this time. It's going to be the third time it's going to be the third time in the last century that there has actually been a coalition government. Which means that no party, whether it's the Labour or the Conservative, have enough votes to hold a majority. And that actually did happen in 2010. The Conservatives didn't get quite enough seats in the House of Commons, so they had to form a coalition with the Lib Dem party, which is actually a smaller third party. The Lib Dems were typically the third largest party in the UK, and they hold about between maybe 10% and 35% of the popular vote, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they hold between 10 and 35% of the seats, because of the first past the post system means that the seats aren't allocated proportionally. But in 2010, the Conservatives didn't hold enough seats to form a government. They only had, I think, 307. And to hold a majority, you need 323. They didn't have that. So they formed a coalition with the Lib Dems, and for the last 5 years, that's the sort of government that we've had. So back to the whole idea about the seats. In this election, it's going to be it might not be a coalition, but it's certainly not going to be a majority government, because the opinion polls suggest that neither one of the two main parties is going to hold enough seats. So we are talking about some sort of coalition or otherwise informal deal. Anyway, returning to the arithmetic, there are 650 seats, so 50% of 650 is 300 and oh god, this is embarrassing. I don't know, 300 and something. But because of one of the Northern Irish parties, the Sinn Féin party, who will always win about 5 seats, but never actually take them in the House of Commons. So the Sinn Féin is a Northern Irish party that wants to unify Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland, which is a different country, and they sort of dispute the authority of the UK government. So, as an act of protest, the Sinn Féin party will never take its seat. So, because of this, an actual majority is slightly lower than the 325 that you need. That's it, 325. Sorry, I can't do basic arithmetic. It's 323 that you need because of the Sinn Féin vote, which makes it slightly lower. Now, the opinion polls predict that the Conservatives will get maybe about 280 seats, and the Labour Party are going to get slightly less than that. So neither are going to hold a majority, as I've said. So they'll have to ally themselves with a smaller party, at least some sort of informal deal. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what exactly happens, which parties form a deal, whether it'll take quite a long time for them to form that deal. I mean, in 2010 it took a week. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, talking about deals, I should probably point out, especially to those that aren't British, what each of the parties represent, what kind of policies the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are interested in, for example. So in the UK, the Conservative Party is the right-wing party, and the Labour Party is the left-wing party. It's worth noting that right-wing doesn't mean the same as it means in the US. There's no, in particular, religion really plays no role in British politics. So when I say right-wing, we're talking about right in an economic sense. So the main difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party is the Conservative Party tends to be in favour of lower taxes, whereas the Labour Party seems to be in favour of higher taxes. And the way this has panned out recently is that the Conservatives will tend to be in favour of things like austerity cuts, which means they cut frontline services in order to try and reduce the budget, whereas the Labour Party will be more inclined to borrow money in order to try and get the economy working or whatever. So both systems have their flaws. I mean, I don't want to be biased here and I suspect a lot of people know which political party I support, but I'm not going to go over that now. But okay, so the Conservative Party is economically neoliberal. I think that's the main thing to understand here. They want lower taxes in particular, whereas the Labour Party want to raise taxes in particular for the sort of working class. Neither the Conservative or Labour Party want to tax the working class overly high, because that would be very, very unpopular, and rightly so. But the main difference between the two parties is their economical stance. With regards to the smaller parties, the Lib Dem party sits sort of in between the Conservative and the Labour, so they're sort of like the centrist party. Their economic policies are somewhere in between Labour and the Conservatives, so they sort of pride themselves in this election as being the party of the moderates. We don't want to borrow as much as the Labour Party, but we don't want to cut as much as the Tory party. So they sort of want this balance between borrowing and cutting. The Lib Dem party is also one of the more socially liberal parties, so they seem that they're more in favour of things like individual rights, more so than the sort of bigger parties. Although Labour in general is considered to be the more liberal party of the two. I don't necessarily think that's true, but that's sort of the impression that it's given. So apart from these three parties, which are Conservative, Labour, and then the Liberal Democrats as being the third biggest party, there are also other minor parties which are becoming increasingly important. There's the SNP, which people might have heard a lot about. The SNP is a Scottish regional party. They're separatist party. So the SNP was really sort of pushing towards a Scottish referendum, because there's a lot of Scots want to go independent from the UK, and there was a referendum recently, and I think about 45% who voted wanted to go independent, but at the time people weren't exactly sure whether it would go independent or whether they'd stay. But the SNP is basically a separatist party that is, if not actually putting independence in their manifesto, they would like Scotland to go independent. Apart from that, they tend to be economically quite left-wing, a lot like the Labour Party. Although one of the main differences between the Labour Party and the SNP is that the SNP is quite against a lot of military spending. So the SNP want to get rid of the nuclear trident project, which is something that they and Labour would disagree upon. So the SNP is a regional nationalist left-wing party that would be promoting Scottish independence. They are going to get a lot of seats. They're going to get at least 50 seats. So actually, even though I said the Lib Dem was the third party, in terms of seats, the SNP is going to get the third most seats out of all the parties. And this sort of rise in popularity only happened over the last few years. That is, especially since the Scottish referendum. Now, apart from these parties, you have the UKIP party, the UK Independence Party, and this party is interesting because there's been a real surge in votes and interest for this party, particularly recently. They share similar economical views to the Conservative Party, again neoliberal. They don't want to raise taxes, but the main policy of UKIP is an EU referendum. They're the Eurosceptic party. They're really the only Eurosceptic party in the UK of any significance. So that sort of sets them apart from the other parties. They also share some libertarian type values, somewhat similar to the Lib Dems, although there are some conflictions. So, for instance, UKIP was not in favour of the gay marriage thing, which is quite anti-liberal. So there are some sort of contradictions here. I think UKIP is sort of a new party that hasn't really found its a coherent policy paradigm yet. And then you also have the Green Party. The Green Party is very left-wing. So the Green Party is the most left-wing party in the country. It's well to the left of Labour. In fact, the Conservative and the Labour Party are very, very similar when being compared with something like the Green Party. Their economic policies are completely different from the other parties. They propose a negative growth economy and a sort of very, very open immigration style system. So they want to increase immigration. They don't like the idea of borders, and they are environmental, but the most striking thing about the Green Party is not their environmental attitudes, which are shared by most of the main parties. So Labour and the Conservative parties all have environmental policies. So the most striking thing about the Green Party is not to do with its environmental policies, which are not really that radical, but its economic policies are very, very left-wing. So the most left-wing party in the country is definitely the Green Party. So apart from that, you have, so those are all the main big players. You also have a few other nationalist parties. So in Wales, you have the Plaid Cymru Party, which is a left-wing. It's a lot like, it has similar views to Labour, but of course it's a Welsh-only party, so it's only going to win seats in Wales. Again, these nationalist parties tend to have policies that favour the individual regions. So the Scottish Party wants to obviously increase benefits towards Scotland. The Welsh Party wants to increase benefits in Wales. I mean, it's all common sense. The other odd one of the politics are rather different though in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's quite interesting because the politics are very, very different there. So in Northern Ireland, you have, as I mentioned a bit earlier, you have the Sinn Féin party, which want Irish unionists. So they want to unify Northern Ireland and Ireland. They're going to get about 5 seats. There's the DUP, which contrasting to all the other national parties, are actually very right-wing. The DUP is perhaps the most right-wing party in the UK. They are quite authoritarian, and they're also Eurosceptic, a lot like UKIP. You also have the SDLP in Northern Ireland. Oh, hang on, the DUP is not separatist though, so that's one thing to bear in mind. The DUP isn't separatist, so which is again a little less usual. They're very unionist. They're very pro United Kingdom. The SDLP is sort of like the left-wing Northern Irish party. They're a lot like Labour. So I think I've gone over all the main parties. There'll be a couple of independents standing, but those, I think there's about 10 or 11 ones that are going to actually win seats. So I thought I might go over my predictions for the seats, since we're going to find out. We're going to find out the day after tomorrow anyway. But I'll go over my predictions. So I personally think that, hang on, my screen's gone. Okay. I personally think that the Conservative Party will get about 285 seats, a big drop from 2010, but they're still going to have a decent proportion, probably nowhere near enough to control a majority. I don't think a Conservative majority is going to happen. Second, Labour's going to get about, I think, about 265, about 20 less than the Conservatives. The main reason for that is that even though Labour is actually gaining popularity in England, particularly in places like London and Wales, there's been a complete crash of Labour support in Scotland. I talked about the SNP. In 2010, the SNP got 4 seats. There's no way that the SNP are going to get less than 50 seats in the 2015 election, and that comes almost exclusively at the expense of the Labour Party. So the Labour Party are guaranteed to lose about 40 seats in Scotland if they're lucky. So the way it balances out is that Labour probably are going to get around 265. So the SNP itself, I think there's 59 seats in Scotland. Okay, it's probably better to list off the ones that aren't going to go to the SNP, if I'm honest, because the vast majority of Scotland is going to the SNP. Orkney and Shetland won't. Orkney and Shetland is going to stay Lib Dem because the Orkney and Shetland has always been Lib Dem for, I think it's been Lib Dem for like 20 or 30 years, and they have quite different politics to the rest of Scotland, being the Northern Isles, and they feel quite separated from the mainland. So they're going to go to the Lib Dem. There's 3 border constituencies, and I'm not exactly sure which ones are going to go where, but at least one of them will go to the Conservatives, I think. There's a possibility that one of them will go to the Lib Dems, but at least one of them will go to the Conservatives, maybe even 2. So there's 2 seats there. Labour might hold on to a couple of seats. So North East Glasgow is one that they're probably going to hold on to. So when you add these sorts of numbers together, you're probably going to end up with the SNP getting between 50 and 56, 57 seats, something like that. I think they're going to probably get about 53. That's my prediction. And then we go on to the Lib Dems. Now the Lib Dems are doing very badly, especially compared to 2010, but they've been on a downward trajectory since then. The main reason for that is that the Lib Dem typically picked up a lot of the young demographic, the student vote. So the Lib Dem was the party of the disenfranchised student who did not want to vote for the big parties that they felt disillusioned with, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party. The Lib Dem Party was sort of the party for them. And one of their policies, in fact, this was their sort of headline policy, is that they wanted to keep university tuition fees at, no, actually, I think they wanted to make them free. They wanted to abolish university tuition fees entirely. But because, and actually I think they got 57 seats or something, which ironically was a little bit of a drop from the last time, but they still did quite well. And a lot of that was from the student vote. But when they were in coalition with the Conservatives in 2010, they rescinded on that promise. The Lib Dems, I'm not sure if they all voted against dropping tuition fees, but they certainly didn't vote for it. And they can't be blamed entirely for this. It was partly due to the environment of the coalition, but in effect, the Lib Dems were crucified over their decision to not drop tuition fees by the student populace, and as a result, their popularity has fallen from about 30%, and it's now running about 10%. So the Lib Dems had 57 seats in 2010. I don't think they're going to get any more than 20, 25 seats at best. My prediction is actually about 21 seats. Okay, so then we have the UK Independence Party. This party is not going to get many seats, mostly because of the way that the proportional representation doesn't favour minor parties. Although it's worth noting that they actually have more popular support than the Lib Dem Party. But the Lib Dems actually do quite well from having strong local candidates, where UKIP doesn't have that, being a very new party. So I think UKIP's going to get maybe 4 seats. My prediction is that UKIP's going to get 4 seats. Particularly from attracting Conservative voters that are Eurosceptic. The Conservatives do have this sort of Eurosceptic wing about them, so the UKIP is attracting a lot of Conservative voters. Moving down from there, we have, in terms of the Northern Irish parties, I think that the status quo is going to be pretty much the same there. Sinn Féin gets 5 seats, DUP gets 8 seats, SDLP gets 3 seats. So I think the status quo applies in Northern Ireland. The DUP are hoping to probably get another, probably get one more seat out of Sinn Féin, but I don't know if that will happen. The status quo will probably stay the same there. Plaid Cymru in Wales, 2 or 3 seats. I'm going to say 2. Not much of a change there. Certainly not anything that interesting. I think that's all the parties, isn't it? Well, the Green Party will get 1 seat. I'm almost certain of that. They have 1 seat in Brighton Pavilion, which is sort of a very wealthy, affluent area. Attracts a lot of former Labour votes to the Green Party. So they had their first MP in 2010. The Green Party was hoping to get some more seats from places like Bristol West, but quite frankly, they won't. And there's no chance that the Green Party will get a second seat. But they'll keep the 1 seat that they have, I think. I'm not sure. Does that add up? John Bercow, of course, the speaker, so he's the guy that sort of controls the debate between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Oh, by the way, if I've ever said that you use the word Tory and Conservative interchangeably, then that's because Tory is sort of a nickname for the Conservative Party, because there was another party that used to be called the Tory Party historically. It's not actually it wasn't actually the same party, but people nicknamed the Conservative Party the Tory Party. So if that's causing any confusion, I apologise. So I think that adds up to 650 if I've got my arithmetic right. Yeah, I think I've counted all through all the seats. So who should you vote for then? I mean, I guess this applies to people that can vote. Well, if you want, I mean, first of all, you've got to vote tactically if you really care about the numbers working. So if your seat is a marginal, then you should probably vote for the person that's most likely to usurp the person that you like the least. So that again, that the tactical voting is an issue with the first past the post system. I'm not going to get into a debate on the merits of that, but there is going to be tactical voting here. As far as policies go, so the main debates that are going on at the moment are immigration. That's a big one. So yeah, I guess people have been hearing a lot about this. In particular, UKIP has been talking about immigration a lot, and the reason for that is that immigration is not possible to control from migrants within the EU while we're still within the EU because of the open borders policy. So essentially, UKIP attract most of its vote from people that want to reduce immigration by leaving the European Union. So immigration is a big thing. So the Labour Party also wants to reduce immigration, and so does the SNP. I think the Conservatives want to control it as well, but they don't seem to have been sort of as forthright about it. So immigration has come up, but it's mostly been UKIP that's been leading the debate on that, and the other parties sort of arguing about Euroscepticism and Europhilia, that sort of thing. The NHS comes up an awful lot. It's come up a lot this year, and the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have been kicking the NHS around between them, and who's going to run the NHS the best. I have my own personal views on this. The Labour Party actually privatised part of the NHS, the National Health Service, a few years ago, and the Conservatives also privatised it to a lesser extent. So the whole debate about whether the NHS should be privatised is something that has been occurring, and the Labour Party would argue, as they were the creators of the NHS in the first place, that it's better in their hands, and the Conservatives would argue, well, the Labour Party had privatised it and that's bad, or whatever. There's a general sort of, in this country, a general strong respect for the National Health Service, and any talk of privatisation is generally a good way to lose votes. So NHS, immigration, what else? Those are the two ones that have come up a lot. There's the economy, and the Conservatives would argue that the Labour government really made the recession a lot worse by reckless amounts of borrowing and importing toxic debt. Things like Gordon Brown selling off a lot of our gold and telling everyone when he was going to do it. So these are points that could be scored against Labour on the economy. And the Labour, on the other hand, would say that under the Conservative government, the debt has actually increased, which it has. So again, I have my own opinions, but I'm not going to bring those into this. So, and the economy is a big one because of the sort of poor economic situation. Education has not really come up that much. It came up a lot in 2010, particularly by the Lib Dems, but the Lib Dems don't want to think about tuition fees at the moment because of how badly it went for them. And really, that's about it. There's really nothing else that seems to have come up all that much. Obviously, all the parties have their own manifestos and policies, but those are the main sort of debates. Okay, so my advice would be, if you want a Labour government, then you should probably vote tactically. But keep in mind that Labour, in order to get into power, would have to do a deal with the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party. And that's going to be very, very unpopular. So the interesting thing is, Labour knows that it's going to be unpopular. But the Labour Party doesn't like the Tory Party. I mean, Peter Hitchens said that the Labour Party exists because of hate for the Tories. So the Labour Party realises that because of its seat loss in Scotland, and because it's not going to get anywhere near enough seats, they're going to have to do a deal with the SNP in order to get into power, being the sort of second party. But they realised that would entail a broken promise and an extremely unpopular deal, which would probably mean the next election they would lose. So this has been a big talking point among the Conservatives. So because of this, it's very hard to know whether the deal will go ahead and we'll get a Labour SNP deal. It probably won't be a coalition, but it will be an informal deal, or whether the Conservatives would go ahead and have a minority government. And there's of course every possibility that the Conservatives will form a coalition or an informal deal with the Liberal Democrats again, provided that there are enough seats for that to work. I think it's a possibility that UKIP could also get into a deal with the Conservatives, but I think that's less likely given that they won't have an awful lot of seats to play with. So, okay, my political views. I suppose after saying all this, I really should give a personal opinion. I guess I'm towards the Conservative side rather than towards the Labour side. I personally think that Labour has been very reckless with the economy. And there are a number of other things that in their manifesto that sort of don't fit well with me. Not that the Conservatives have been by any means perfect. I would say they've made a lot of mistakes. But at the end of the day, no political party is going to agree with you entirely. I would, if you are in the UK, I mean, it's probably too late to try and implore people to vote, given that deadline was a couple of weeks ago, I think. Was it a couple of weeks ago? I can't remember. But it's worth voting because it's no good saying that you want your views to be heard if you don't go and vote, I guess. There is an argument that it's only one vote, so why does it matter? It's not going to change anything. And I can see that, although I wouldn't really be spreading that sort of view around. And I think people like Russell Brand that are going around telling people not to vote is a really repugnant thing to be doing. But anyway, it's going to be an interesting election. My prediction is that we'll probably get some sort of informal deal between Labour and the SNP. It's something that I don't want, but I think that's probably what's going to happen. Second most likely thing is probably some sort of Conservative minority government, perhaps with a coalition between the Liberal Democrats, UKIP, or even the DUP. There's every possibility that these debates will go on for a long time with no one being able to come up with a deal. And the interesting thing is that the Liberal Democrats while they're in power got pushed through a deal that means you can't just call another general election without 2/3 of the vote, and that's, in light of the situation, that's not necessarily guaranteed. So it's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top. So polls open at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 a.m. close at 10 p.m. The votes will come through. We'll find the results shortly afterwards, and then we'll get an exit poll. So it'll be interesting to see how close the predictions are. So that's it. I rambled on for a lot longer than I intended to, but I wanted to do a video, explaining all the policies of the parties and do it in a much less waffly way. And I'm sure if I'd done a video, it would be a lot less long and waffly. But again, I hadn't had the time to construct a video, which takes an awful lot. It takes 5 times as long to create a well-crafted video than it would be to do something like this. So I haven't had the time, unfortunately. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the general election. I hope this has been informative, and thank you for listening.